Yo, dear listeners and viewers, hello and welcome back to the podcast. In this solo episode, I want to talk about a topic that I've been reflecting on quite deeply for several weeks now. It's personal, but I think it will really help you as well. Because what I've been reflecting on is that fitness has never come easier to me than now. If you have been following me for a while, or if you know me personally, then from an outside perspective, it might not look to you like much has changed because ever since I got into bodybuilding, ever since I became a coach, I have not missed a meal, I have not missed a workout. Or rather, I followed the plan that I laid out or that a coach of mine laid out for me. So if it was a deload week, of course, I wouldn't train, but I wasn't missing sessions. It was following the plan. Similarly, if the plan was to track, I would always track. If the plan was to go untracked, I would go untracked. And I would always meet or hit, rather, my nutritional targets as well as my step target. I'm not saying this to big myself up or anything. I believe it's the objective truth because I've been tracking this data of mine ever since I started bodybuilding. I am saying this to explain that it might look to you like nothing has really changed, but mentally, I feel really different. When I started bodybuilding, all of this was a lot more difficult. And so I've been thinking about what has made the biggest difference in my fitness journey, not just in the last 8 years of bodybuilding, but ever since I started exercising. So in this episode, I'm going to talk you through the two main shifts that have happened to me personally to foster this kind of ease when it comes to sticking to my goals. So, if you are struggling to build consistency and to maintain it long term, I think this episode will give you some food for thought. First of all, I want to start with where I came from because make no mistake, this wasn't always this easy at all. So, I'm going to start from the very beginning. I got into exercise when I was around 3 years old, and I hated it. My parents used to put me in some sort of exercise class at least twice a week since I was 3 years old. And the first two sports I did were swimming and volleyball. Swimming lasted a very short time. I think I did it in two stints. One when I was really little. 3 years old is, I don't know if he was 3 years old. I can't really remember. I don't have a good memory in terms of associating my age to what happened. I think I was that young. I could have been a little bit older. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of what I'm saying. Let's say that when I started exercising and I thought I was a really, really small child, the first sport I did was swimming. I hated it, so that stopped relatively quickly. And then I think I tried it again sometime later. And when I say tried it again, my parents had me try it again. If it had been coming from me, I never would have joined those exercise classes, to be clear. I really did not like exercise. I wasn't comfortable with it. I wasn't good at it. And that was probably played a big role into why I didn't like it. And then the other main sport I did before I turned about 11 was volleyball. I think I played volleyball for about 6 years, from the time I was 6 or 7, probably more like 6, to the time I was around 11. So maybe 5 years. I don't know. Again, the dates are a bit unclear in my head, to be fair. It's not like I kept track. And volleyball, unfortunately, was a really difficult experience for me. I was constantly verbally abused and made fun of in multiple ways by both my teammates and also my coach. I was made to feel worthless because I wasn't good enough, and I was made to feel like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't in a small body. I already was a little bit chubby as a child of that age. So this really ruined exercise classes for me or team sports. And when I ended up starting a sport that I actually enjoyed, that was judo. I was about, again, 11, 12, something like that. That was the first sport I legitimately, genuinely enjoyed. But unfortunately, my visceral response to going to the classes was to feel nausea and to throw up. I didn't always throw up, but I always felt like I could because I felt so much anxiety around the possibility that somebody would put me through the verbal abuse that I had undergone while I was doing volleyball. Anyway, without taking you through every single sport I did at that age, this is all to say there was a time when every workout felt like a chore, when eating healthy food was boring. I did not like it. I was the typical kid who liked chocolate and who liked pizza, sausages, and French fries. And when my mother served me vegetables or fruit, I would eat it because that's what I was given, but it was not at all my preference. And finally, as I've said, people made fun of my weight constantly. This happened when I was playing team sports, it happened when I was in school. And now the change could not be more stark. Compared to then, fitness is really easy, as I was saying. And I'm still not genetically gifted. I'm still just as bad at sports as I used to be. I've also not found an inexhaustible fountain of motivation. And my life has definitely not gotten any less stressful. Actually, it's only gotten worse the older I've gotten. And finally, I'm not a professional athlete who can just focus on training, eating, and sleeping on repeat. So if I'm able to maintain my current level of commitment, which is pretty high, I train 5 days a week, I do 10,000 steps a day, I track my calories every day, and I meet all of my nutritional targets. If I can maintain this level of commitment and genuinely feel like it comes like second nature to me now, it's because my relationship with fitness has changed so much over these past decades. And today I want to talk about the two main mindset shifts that have made this possible, or rather, not made this possible, but that have made the biggest difference. Of course, there have been many more shifts. We're talking about nearly 30 years of existence. If it's true that I started at 3 years old, then it would be 27 years. If I started around 4 or 5, then we're talking 25, 26 years. It's a long flipping time, okay? It's a good generation at this point. So the first shift I want to talk about happened earlier on in my journey, and it amounted to this. I stopped pursuing fitness for other people's sake. When I went on my first diet, I was 14 years old. And at the time, I was incredibly consistent, but it was also the most unsustainable diet imaginable, given that, unfortunately, it became anorexia nervosa. So obviously, getting an eating disorder when you're trying to diet is not healthy. 0 out of 10 recommend. And it's also, by definition, unsustainable because anorexia nervosa can kill you. And because if you survive it like I did, you will not be doing that for the rest of your life, of course. Anyway, aside from obviously developing an eating disorder as a result, the biggest problem with the approach I took at the time was the reason why I was dieting in the first place. And this reason would have held me back even if I hadn't contracted anorexia in the process. And this reason at the time was very simple. I was doing it for external validation. As I said, I got bullied constantly for my weight. At school, people called me ugly, fat, a whale, you name it, I've probably heard it at some point in my lifetime. And there is one episode that I think I've covered before, but I need to tell the story because it stayed with me. I still remember it to this day. Of course, I'm going to be translating the quotes because the original conversation happened in Italian since I grew up in Italy. Anyway, I was probably around between 11 and 13. And that was probably one of the straws that broke the camel's back for me when it came to making me decide to start a diet. Because I had this middle school classmate who once told me, and here I'm quoting and translating from Italian, "You're cool, but someone like me doesn't really hang out with a whale." Now, this was his attempt to explain that he liked being my friend in private, but in school, in front of everyone else, he couldn't be seen hanging out with me, or he would have been termed a loser, because people like him, who didn't want to be losers, wouldn't hang out with people of my size, implying clearly that I was a loser because of the size that I was. So at school, he actually bullied me, like everyone else. And then in private, he was all friendly. So this was, as I've said, one of the final straws that really made me think, okay, I've got to make a change here. And so when I embarked on that, I call it a weight loss diet because I knew absolutely nothing and all I cared about was to weigh less, which obviously is not aiming for fat loss. It's just aiming for scale weight losses. When I approached this diet, I wasn't doing it because I wanted better health or for some other reason that had to do with myself. I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it because I wanted people to like me and to find me attractive. And in psychology, I believe this would be called external motivation, when you're driven by something outside of yourself, such as approval, validation, recognition, attention, you name it. Any of these reasons come from the outside, so they are a form of external motivation. Now, importantly, I don't think external motivation is inherently bad. There are situations when it's really useful. For example, types of external motivation could also be wanting to win a powerlifting meet, or wanting to get lean for a photo shoot, or wanting to compete in a bodybuilding show. External motivation in this situation can help you push through short term challenges like competitions and other sporting events. The problem is that fitness isn't short term, and achieving and maintaining results requires daily decisions for the rest of your life. For example, if you want successful fat loss, you don't just have to lose the weight, you also have to maintain it. And the same applies if you're trying to build muscle, which is far slower than fat loss. Significant muscle growth doesn't just take 12 weeks like a fat loss diet might be for somebody who doesn't have a lot of weight to lose. Significant muscle growth takes years. So, external motivation can be brilliant at getting you started. It can be brilliant for short term challenges, but it won't keep you in the game for the long haul. And this was certainly true for me. So, getting to the first game changing shift, this was the shift from having only external motivation to having both external motivation for short term challenges and internal motivation as well. This happened around 2018 once I recovered from the eating disorder and I started getting into bodybuilding. At first, I wanted to find a way to enjoy fitness without, well, the obsessive compulsive tendency to undereat and overtrain that I had developed during the years of the eating disorder. Then those reasons evolved, and I realized I was a trans man. So one other reason became I wanted to build a more masculine physique, a more gender affirming physique, while I was waiting for my medical transition to start in March 2020. So I spent a good year and a half. No, it was nearly 2 years. It was 18. No, I can't do math right now. It was nearly 2 years. We're talking 22 months, I think, because I started in June 2018. I started T. So I started to start. Sorry, I'll start again. I began bodybuilding in June 2018, and then I started testosterone in March 2020. So it was 22 months, April, May, June, 21 months between my realization that I was trans and the start of my bodybuilding journey. The two pretty much coincided. I came out to my partner, and that was the first time I came out to anyone as trans in May 2018. And then I started training for gender affirming purposes in June 2018. So it was a good 21 months before I could start my medical transition. And at the time, it felt really empowering for me to feel like I was already taking steps towards that transition by working towards a more gender affirming physique. Now, since then, my motivations have continued to evolve. Right now, training is no longer gender affirming for me. I am mainly focused on my bodybuilding journey. I want to be successful in every bodybuilding phase. I want to build as much muscle as possible while also continuing to work on being lean. So I want to have the leanest physique I can have with the most amount of muscle while also keeping my body fat levels within a healthy range and thriving in life. And speaking of that, while I go through this process, I want to enjoy my life. I also want to feel strong, physically capable, and I want to maintain independence as I age. And as much as possible, I want to work towards staying injury free and knowing when to push and when to pull to stay on top of my health. And now, if someone compliments my physique, great, thank you very much, but I don't care anymore. And if someone insults my physique, which believe me, on Instagram and YouTube and the other social media platforms I'm on, it happens plenty. But if somebody insults my physique, I don't give a shit. Neither comment determines whether I train tomorrow or whether I stick to my nutritional targets. I am no longer doing this for anyone else but myself. So this was the first massive shift that has contributed to making my fitness experience so much easier. The second shift was more recent, and it was that I stopped chasing a physique and I started building an identity. And here I want to talk a little bit about the definition of discipline, because I think that the conversation around discipline isn't particularly nuanced, at least on the social media platforms I'm on. When I see any type of content made about discipline, this is usually in the context of trying to explain or give advice to people who can't achieve their goals. And the typical solution is, well, you need to be more disciplined. And to be honest, I don't disagree. But again, I think that this statement is lacking nuance because I believe that there are two kinds of discipline. The first comes from chasing an outcome. For example, you want visible abs or to lose 20 pounds, to get bigger shoulders, and so on. These goals are useful, they are motivating. I'm not saying that this type of motivation is wrong or useless, but for many people, much like an external type of motivation, this only works short term. For example, you might know people who say, every time I achieve a goal, like I run a marathon or I do some other sporting events, I need a new challenge to keep myself going. And without a goal, they have no motivation to keep up the same fitness lifestyle. And even if they don't achieve the goal, their motivation for that goal can still wane, and then they end up with the same outcome. They're stuck or they even regress. And that's where the second kind of discipline becomes more important than the first. And this is this discipline that comes from identifying with the fitness lifestyle. This doesn't mean that every workout is fun and easy, or that eating vegetables instead of pizza is always smooth and it doesn't cause any questions whatsoever or any temptation whatsoever. It means that you want to live the fitness lifestyle because this is the kind of person that you want to be. You train because you identify as someone who trains. You eat well because you identify as someone who values their health and physique. And you go for a walk because you identify with somebody who just does that. There is a huge difference between saying, I'm trying to get fit, and I'm someone who trains. When you say I'm trying to get fit, you're describing a goal that you have. When you say I'm someone who trains and eats this way 24/7, you are describing an identity. And for me, that identity took literal decades to develop. It definitely didn't happen when I was 14. It definitely didn't happen when I started bodybuilding in 2018. It took longer than that. At the time, I still cared a lot about the outcome, which was mainly changing the way that my body looked. And on the whole, this still made me successful. That's why I'm saying the first type of discipline, the discipline that comes from chasing a specific goal, isn't useful or isn't useless or wrong. It just, I don't think it helps you be able to stick with a fitness lifestyle for decades and decades. It works for as long as it works, and I don't think you need to ditch it. I think you need to combine it with the discipline that comes from identifying with this fitness lifestyle. So, on the whole, I was still successful, largely, at least from my perspective, but it was definitely a lot more challenging than it is now. So now I'm going to focus a bit more on the time since 2018 because I reflected plenty on my challenges when I was younger. So when I started bodybuilding in 2018, yes, as I said, from an outside perspective, you would think that nothing has changed because I was on top of my calories, on top of my macros, I got all of my steps and I got all of my training done. And if I had cardio, I would do the cardio too. But mentally, there was a huge difference in the way that I approached nutrition more so than training. I was lucky that since I got into bodybuilding, training has always come relatively easy because I really, really enjoy it. Not everybody enjoys resistance training, although everybody would benefit from doing it. I was in the lucky position, and I am in the lucky position, that it's one of my favorite activities. But with nutrition, I had an entirely different relationship with food. And I've been thinking about it deeply lately. I've come to this conclusion. This might continue to evolve. These are only the thoughts I've had up until now. I believe that before the eating disorder, I didn't really have a very intuitive approach to eating. I lived in a household where I was lucky that my mom made me food every day. She also had certain rules. And one major rule was that I could eat what I wanted once I ate what she made. So I didn't really have strong hunger and fullness cues on top of that. So when you combine these two factors, what happened was I would eat what she put in front of me. And once I did that, then I would eat what I wanted. And I wasn't able to stop when I was full. I stopped when I didn't want to eat anymore, which is very different. And I could pack away a lot of food, which is how I became overweight. When I had the eating disorder, I spent years and years when I had an eating disorder and then when I had disordered eating habits, even though I was technically weight restored. I spent years saying no to so many foods. We're not talking just the typical restrictive approach that somebody without an eating disorder might take. So something like, I'm going to stop eating sugar. Yes, I completely stopped eating things like cake, ice cream, cookies, and such. We're talking completely. There was not a day where I fell off the wagon, so to speak. I was really obsessive about it. And I would never eat these foods. But in addition to that, I had other restrictive rules too. Like, I wouldn't eat bread after lunch. Bread was my favorite food. I wouldn't eat carbs in the evening at all. I basically had a list of, I don't know, 10 foods that I was comfortable with. That would be 0% fat Greek yogurt, fruit and vegetables, except those that had too many calories in my view. Yes, there were vegetables that felt too high in calories. This was how bad it was at some point. I also ate chicken breast without the skin on, so the leanest possible cut. I would eat only wholemeal bread to the point that I would refuse any other kind of bread, and I would get mad if my mother accidentally bought the wrong kind for me. So it was really a very short list of foods. So we're not just talking restriction of highly palatable foods, and I say just. I'm not saying that that's good restriction or that I don't feel for people who restrict that way. I'm saying that mine was so extreme there was basically nothing left. So I believe that once I got over that phase and I entered my bodybuilding era and I discovered that I could meet my physique goals without restricting so much if I ate the right amount of calories and macros for my goal at the time, that was such a game changer for me. But also, it ushered in an age where I did what, in hindsight now, I recognize as compensating for all those years of restriction. There were times when I felt resentful about eating fruit, vegetables, and all of those super healthy foods that I love, that I had forced myself to eat uniquely throughout all the years of having had an eating disorder. And also, I felt that all of my favorite foods, in quotation marks, were really high calorie. I remember there were times between 2018 and the last year or so where I would ask myself, why are all of my favorite foods so high in calories? Why do I have to adore eating things like pizza and ice cream and chips, and I don't like the healthy food all that much? It felt like it would always be a losing battle for me to have a balanced relationship with food without tracking my calories and macros, because left to my own devices, I genuinely felt like I was depriving myself if I prioritized nutritious food over food that was more highly palatable. And after years of that, now I can realize that that was a, let's call it a rebellious response to the years of malnutrition. I deprived myself of so much that once I realized I didn't need to do it anymore, I needed to spend some time with the foods that I hadn't allowed myself. So I overcompensated to the point where I thought that my taste led me towards mainly highly palatable and less nutritious food, and that I didn't like um, more nutritious and lower calorie food all that much. I ate it because in a deficit it would keep me full, and because obviously it's very nutritious and it helped me meet my macros, but it was not something that I saw myself enjoying without always having a as many highly palatable foods that as I could fit into my macros and calories in any particular phase. And lately, I've been thinking about this topic so deeply because I've been so in awe of the change that I've experienced. I feel like from the eating disorder years through to lately this past year, I've had a lot of food noise. When I had an eating disorder, I thought about food constantly because I was hungry, lo and behold, unsurprising. But then when I was going through the first years of bodybuilding, I also thought about food so much because I was trying to find this balance where yes, I was having the nutritious food that met my macros, but I also wanted this highly palatable food all of the time. So how could I essentially play macro Tetris to fit everything into my calorie target at the time? Now I have been so unbothered with food in that way lately that again I was prompted to record this podcast, and I even wrote a couple of newsletters on this a similar topic. I don't think anymore that my favorite foods are all high in calories. I don't crave highly palatable foods the way that I used to. I don't put them on a pedestal as the best food ever while thinking of my current diet as what I need to do to achieve my goals, almost like it's a chore. I cannot put into word how awe-inspiring this is to me. This feels like a massive shift. It makes me feel like finally I have overcome completely all of the issues that I developed when I developed the eating disorder and when I was dealing with that overcompensation phase that I've talked about. And more in general, expanding the conversation to fitness as a whole, at this stage of my life, training, eating nutritious food, moving my body, and sleeping enough have never felt easier. And as I said before, life hasn't gotten any easier either. The difference is that I don't have to work as hard as I did mentally to make myself follow the plan, because the plan, in quotation marks, is just the way that I live my life, whether I'm at home, traveling, bulking, or cutting. And yes, I absolutely still care about my physique. I am a bodybuilder through and through. I love the act of building my body through the combination of training and nutrition. I'm also vain, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the word, even though it has a negative connotation. So my appearance is important to me. But my physique is no longer the main reason or the sole reason that I stay consistent. So I think the point that I'm going to make now comes through already through everything I've said in this podcast so far, but I want to spell it out anyway. We often talk as though identity is something fixed. People use phrases like, I'm not a fitness kind of person, or I'm too lazy, as though this is part of who they are and will always be. And I don't believe that at all. Identity can be built. You can say, I'm not the kind of person who exercises, but I can become that kind of person. And I'm not saying this is easy. It has taken me decades, like I've said throughout. And there are many reasons why it's hard, and for some people it's harder. First of all, we live in an obesogenic environment, which is designed to tempt us to overeat and move less, and in a society that glorifies drinking too much and eating too much, and calls you a bit obsessive if you're somebody who likes to stay fit. Secondly, some people genuinely have it harder for a number of reasons. They may have more hunger or food noise genetically. They may have health conditions that make exercise harder and weight gain easier. They may have been brought up on frozen fried food and McDonald's. Not everybody is so lucky to have had a mother like mine who made food for me every single day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Or some people may be surrounded by others with unhealthy habits, and peer pressure is a real challenge for many of us. I could go on and on about all the reasons that make creating an identity around fitness difficult. So it's not easy, but you can do it. Because every time you repeat a behavior, you're casting another vote for the kind of person that you want to become. A single workout is not going to change your identity. a single healthy meal is not going to change your identity. But once you do it hundreds of times, thousands of times, with years of repetition, hopefully surrounding yourself with the right kind of people, such as a coach and friends who do care. If they don't care about their own fitness and health, they respect that you do, instead of trying to pull you away from that, or at least making fun of you for wanting to do it. Do it long enough, surround yourself with the right people, and something is going to shift. And when I look back over the last decades, I don't think that finding fitness easier for me was about finding more motivation or becoming another David Goggins and just pushing hard all of the time. Blinkers on, just lock in, bro, or whatever people say these days. I think for me, it was about changing the answers to two questions. The first question was, who am I doing this for? And the second question was, who do I want to become? And I think that these two shifts made all the difference to get me from where I was in my youth, when I was gritting my teeth through dieting and cardio for the sake of other people's aesthetic preferences, to where I was earlier in my bodybuilding journey, when I felt like I was in a better place. But I still needed a lot of willpower to maintain my behaviors, and I had such challenging relationship with food still, to where I am now, where all of these behaviors feel like second nature, and I don't think my relationship with food has ever been more neutral. So if you are struggling with consistency right now, I hope this helps you think more deeply about the reason why. Ultimately, I'd recommend asking yourself these two questions. Who are you doing this for? And who do you want to become? And on that philosophical note, that is a wrap for today's podcast. As always, if you want to work with me, you can read more about my services and find out more about my prices, and finally apply via the link to my website, which is in the description. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will talk to you next time.